A young boy, 15, brilliant musician, very talented in other ways, gassed himself in my study, leaving a note saying that the reason for this was that he was homosexual and he was worried about bringing shame on his family. So what I predicted happened, and made me both very angry, but also determined to do something about this if I had the opportunity. When I became Home Secretary, I did.
Yes, and so there were a couple of sort of standout points I think that come out in your book in relation to incidents that occurred that formed your political ideology. Yeah. Just moving in then to your sort of introduction into, I suppose, the Labour Party and Barbara Castle, who takes you on as a special advisor. You've already built up quite a nice sort of CV by that point with the National Union of Students and I think ILIA
and I was candidate for Tunbridge, a Labour candidate for Tunbridge.
And one of the phrases that in fact you pick up as well on one of the chapters is a phrase that she used as the reason why she selected you to be her special advisor. And that was because you had guile and low cunning, which doesn't instantly strike one as being a recommendation. I wonder if you could maybe give some idea of how you demonstrated those characteristics.
Yes, how this arose was that Barbara was seeing a visiting foreign dignitary came in to see her. And I remember her complaining that she had no idea why this man was coming in. But she had her two special advisors in the room as well, I think just to pass the time. And one was Professor Brian Abel-Smith, who was Professor of Social Administration at the LSE, a very senior and distinguished figure, and incidentally from that English social tradition of the Quakers, the Buxtons and the Friars and people like that, and the Abel-Smiths, a banking family. Brian was a very, very distinguished figure, and there was me. Anyway, the conversation was dying away, and this visiting foreign dignitary said to Barbara, what did the two of us do? So quick as a flash, Barbara said, I've appointed Brian Abel-Smith for his brains, and Jack for guile and low cunning. And it sort of stuck, and I've used it a bit against myself, because it was not interesting about Barbara as well as about me. And she meant it in jest, but she also meant that if you were involved, as a special advisor, you needed to know about the low arts of politics as well as the higher arts. And I so that's why it's stuck. And I don't want people to get the wrong idea that I've spent my life in politics sort of plotting, because actually, on the whole, one of the reasons why I think I've survived is that I kept out of most of the plotting. I think it's not worthwhile. But you have got to be savvy. You have. You've got to be aware that there are others who aren't particularly straight.
One of the things you did as Home Secretary was to set up the Lawrence Inquiry with Macpherson. And I think that flows through in a sense of social justice. More recently, more revelations have come out in relation to what the Met was up to, particularly in relation to the Lawrence family and their associates. Have you got any? You've said that you're going to push for a further inquiry into that. Is that?
Well, I think the current Home Secretary, Theresa May, I think is actively thinking about that. And if I were in her position, I'd be doing what she's doing, which is to find out as much as she could, as one could, from the Met and from others to work out what form of inquiry is needed. But it is a most shocking story that it now transpires that not only were the Metropolitan Police CID in that part of South East London working without enthusiasm to find the 5 thugs who committed the murder, but also they'd invented suspicions about the Lawrence family themselves and were viewing them not exclusively as victims, but as suspects as well, particularly this young man Wayne Brooks, who was present when the murder took place. I mean, and also, subsequently, after that first report was published, that a meeting or meetings at which the Lawrence family attended were covertly recorded.
But the timing of this, though, supposedly they were trying to find this information out while the inquiry was about to come into play, not during the initial investigation stages. Was that?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure when the meeting with the Lawrence family and the police took place for supper. I thought that it was a meeting after the inquiry reported. But what is, although I think if that were the case, knowing the senior police officer, John Grieve, who was running that part of the Met to implement the Lawrence report, I think that it is quite probable that he did the wrong thing for what he regarded as the right reasons, as it were. And that's not in any sense to gloss over it, but he, in my experience, was a very good man and a very unusual police officer. But what was disgraceful was for the way in which the Metropolitan Police were monitoring the Lawrence family as if they were suspects. And for this, A, to have done that, and B, to have suppressed knowledge of this to the first inquiry, entirely wrong and very shocking. But is a further spotlight on the culture of the Metropolitan Police at that time, I'm afraid.
I mean, in some ways it reinforces McPherson's conclusions.
Yeah, absolutely. There have long been suspicions of corruption by the police in South London. Some suggestions about relationships between certain senior police officers and middle-ranking officers and some of the criminal gangs operating in South London. And they were pretty, in the period 93, 94, 95. But in a sense, what subsequently came out has compounded those suspicions. However, all that said, the absolute determination, particularly of Doreen Lawrence, to see justice for her son, has meant that what she began has led to a sea change in social attitudes in this country and in the way the police behave towards black and Asian people. And it's down to that one woman, in my view.
Moving on to another incident that occurred during your time as Home Secretary, related to General Pinochet, who had his extended stay here. You refer in the book that you're taking as a Trappist vow. What that, in order to say that your decisions on whether or not he should be released, which couldn't be challenged. What that seems to presuppose is that you, from the outset, had a view as to, had your own sort of bias as to the position.
Yes, I did have a bias, because if by a bias you meant that I thought that dictators who seized power by violence and then been responsible for the death of other people ought to be brought to justice, I was biased. I'm absolutely guilty to that. And I also thought that since we signed up to a large number of international instruments against torture and for universal jurisdiction over things like murder, that, and we're very proud we've signed up to this, that, having agreed the words, we ought to agree the deed that went with it, which is that when we are presented with an instant case, we ought to follow it through. And I knew a bit about Chile, because I'd spent some time in Chile as a student leader in 1966. That, by the way, led to Pinochetistas being utterly convinced I must have been involved with Allende, which I wasn't, and that I must have said something which would show overtly my bias. So they spent a lot of money researching who I'd been with, which girls I'd walked out with the beach at Viña del Mar in 1966. And then there was a terrible flurry, and I remember that I'd written an article for the Tribune newspaper about my trip to Chile. And the lawyers in the Home Office thought this would be a fine, as it were, a straw, and prove that I had to be recused from the whole process. Anyway, finally, because I'm a squirrel, I found this bloody article in a loft in our house in Blackburn. And I have to say, I mean, it was a very, very worthy article about agrarian reform in Chile. But, even I, as a proud author, had almost lost the will to live about halfway through. This proved nothing, except that this was my first effort at journalism. Anyway, I knew if I said a word, one word, giving any indication away at all of my opinions, these would lead to court action against me. So I just shut up. I didn't talk to anybody about it at all. And Tony kept trying to talk to me about it and would start shifting from foot to foot in his den. And I'd have to say to him, I can't talk to you about this, Tony. And he'd get a bit cross about this. And I then say, if I talk to you about this, and this goes to court, which for sure it will, and I'm asked whether you've spoken to me about this, I will have to say, yes, you have spoken to me about this, because I'm not saying you haven't. And I have to say what you've said. So my strong advice is that you don't talk about it, which led to sort of great frustration, but there you go. But I got through successfully all the legal challenges.
He did sort of make some comment about when he's going to be on the plane or something.
No, I mean, you want as far as there is a British establishment, and in a way there is, the British establishment wanted me to get shot of this man very quickly. And because we were natural allies of the Chileans had helped us a lot in the Falklands War. Chile was seen as the England of South America. Pinochet, many people thought, including Margaret Thatcher, that he saved Chile. And one of the things about somebody who researched the book found in the archives, and we got agreement of the Cabinet Office to reprint the letter from Margaret Thatcher to Tony Blair, basically accusing him of being a wimp and of not controlling him properly. And it's quite interesting, actually, because it showed, and in fairness to Tony, because I said to Tony, I'm the Home Secretary, I have to make these decisions, they're quasi-legal, and I'm sorry, I can't take account of what you're saying. He huffed and puffed about this, but he put up with it. Whereas what it became clear from Margaret Thatcher's letter to Tony was that with her secretary, she probably would have threatened him with the sack unless Pinochet had been dispatched.
So, despite the precautions you took to make sure you were sort of fairly solid on the decisions that you took, there were a number of hearings.
Yes.
The second of which I think it was that sort of fell over because one of the law lords, Lord Hoffman, failed to declare that his wife was a. So how did you feel about the fact that you've gone to all these extraordinary lengths and yet here one of the judges?
This is a man called Lenny Hoffman, who's a very, very bright lawyer. But as I say in the book, Lenny Hoffman's got such a high opinion of himself, in many ways deservedly, that he had not the faintest notion that anybody would think it odd that Amnesty was one of the parties to the action on the sheet. His wife worked for Amnesty and was senior in the trustees, and yet he didn't disclose this. And because he just thought, I think, I don't know, no doubt, that irrespective of what his wife's interests were, he was going to come to this in a judicial way. Although I have to say, I'm also absolutely clear, given his background, a South African, from the Jewish community in South Africa, he left South Africa because they couldn't stand apartheid. I have more than a suspicion that he was coming to the issue, as I was, and very good it would have been too, if he'd actually declared the interests of his wife and then said to Pinochet's lawyers, do you want me to recuse myself or not? They probably would have said, no, it's fine, in the circumstances. But I was absolutely furious when the whole judgment of the law courts, which had found that 36 of the charges against Pinochet were well-founded and could stay on the sheet. That had to be overturned. I mean, it led to a major, still not well reported, crisis amongst the law courts as well. This was one of perhaps the most shocking thing that had happened to that institution in decades. And then there had to be a further hearing, different panel of law courts, who, for technical reasons about the date from which this universal jurisdiction should run, reduced the number of charges from 36 to 3. And I was under very great pressure to release him, which I refused to do. In the end, I did release him on medical grounds. And I turned over in my mind whether I was right to do that. And what happened there was that the Chilean embassy put in medical evidence to say that he was suffering from dementia and unfit to plead. The Home Office, I said I wasn't willing to accept that. We had to see what our own medics would say. So we got the senior medics who were used by the prosecution to examine defendants who were pleading that they were unfit, who were claiming they were unfit to plead. And these were tough forensic psychiatrists and psychologists and physicians. And they examined Pinochet. To my great surprise, I'm afraid sorry, all 4 of them said that Pinochet was unfit to plead. And the question then was, did I say, well, I still think he should go to court? Or was there a way in which I could frankly engineer a court hearing on the medical evidence? But the truth is, I mean, if any lawyers asked you, all the advice was that the court would turn me over, and there's a test called Wednesbury unreasonableness, that if a Secretary of State is declared to have acted so irrationally that no reasonable man could possibly have come to the view that he did, then his decision can be overturned. And the truth was, on the face of that evidence, if I refused to act on it, I think the court would have turned me over and would have criticised me very heavily, almost to the point of resignation. But what I should have done, if I thought about it, is when the Chilean embassy came forward with their original medical evidence, said, I'm not going to make a decision about this. This needs to go to court. But anyway, I didn't. And so Pinochet went back and, as everyone will recall, when he made a miraculous recovery on the aeroplane and got up out of his wheelchair as if to give 2 fingers to me. But anyway, so I regret the fact that I did have to release him. But the Chileans say to me that keeping him incarcerated for 16 months profoundly changed the course of Chilean history. And so it was worth doing. And although despite the efforts of prosecutors in Chile, he evaded prosecution there for the same reason. And they were almost to the point of getting him for trial when he dropped down dead.
In some ways, there are, I think, possibly similar parallels then moving from the Home Office to the Foreign Office and in your approach to Iraq.
Yeah.
Because clearly, with Pinochet, you would have liked to have kept him here and allowed justice to have been done in that respect, but you wanted to go by the book on it and make sure that the procedures were in place because you recognised that despite your own feelings, you had to have the correct procedures in place. And when it came to the decision about Iraq, it seems that there's George Bush and Tony Blair, and then behind them stand you and Colin Powell. And it seemed very much that it was the two of you that you and Colin Powell together had the same sort of outlook and were trying to influence, in a sense, your leaders in that respect into the course of action that was to be taken.
Yes, that's true. And it's a matter of sort of happy coincidence that this man who was the first soldier, the most senior military man in the United States, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who's seen active service. On one side, and I've never been in the military at all, his father was a consul, that we should turn out to